Welcome to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco, bringing you interviews with industry experts and regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews in 60 days, guaranteed. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Hello, everyone. I have with me today one of my favorite clients, Jeff Olson. Jeff is a cloud and digital technologist, and after 8 years as the founder of a technology consulting startup focusing on cloud adoption, implementation, and migration services, he joined the consulting organization of a Fortune 500 technology vendor, where he spent 4 years helping to build their services strategy and service offerings to support enterprise cloud and digital transformation initiatives. He launched his job search in February of 2018 and landed in record time. Just a couple months later, he took on the role as Principal Client Technologist at Cloud Technology Partners, which is a premier cloud services and software company for enterprises moving to leading cloud platforms. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on the new job.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks very much for the congrats. It's been a fun yet interesting ride, and I'm very excited for what happens next.
One of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on is so many people that I work with are, struggling with the job search, and the fact that you have come out on the other side. We're hoping to use this time to pick your brain and see what worked and what didn't and all of that.
Absolutely.
So I did a quick intro, but if there's any information in terms of your career history and overview that you think will help us to understand your story, share with me a quick overview of your career history.
Sure. So I like to say I've taken a pretty interesting career path. I think in the realm of kind of how some people progress in their overall career, I've kind of done it backwards, where I got out of school or got out of college and kind of went into my own business, right? So basically, just to kind of give you some backstory on that, I wasn't necessarily looking to say, hey, I'm graduating school, I'm going to start my own business. I kind of fell into it from combination of some of the work I was doing during the summers and during holiday breaks in college, where, I was really kind of hustling around New York City and trying to make some money to spend during the school year, really focused around helping, small businesses at that time set up computers and their networks and kind of get them up and running. And when I got out of school, there's one client I had, and I'm still very good friends with to this day, said, hey, you should really consider about starting your own business and kind of take it to the next level and focus more on medium-sized businesses and, businesses that are really looking to leverage more advanced technologies. So, for me, it wasn't so much about, hey, I need to go and make money. I've kind of always followed my heart in what I was passionate about. And technology for me was something that, I knew that I woke up every day and was very excited to learn something new about technology and to be able to kind of pass that on to other people. So I did that. And, much to my surprise, I was able to do it successfully. I was able to make a living on it and living in New York City.
Amazing.
So for me, it just kind of snowballed from there, and I got more clients. And as I got about 4 or 5 years into it, the whole industry of technology was changing. Everything was shifting to cloud, removing a lot of kind of the on-premise capital expenditures that companies were paying. And there were certain industries that I actually had footprints in already, like financial services and marketing and public relations and retail, that were really looking to leverage some of these new and emerging technologies. And I saw it as an opportunity for me to really kind of get a head start for the size of the companies that we focused on. And basically from there, I kind of went all in, and it was definitely a pretty good bet that I made to really focus on some of these technologies and some of the emerging spaces. So basically, after 7-8 years, that same client that when I was in college said, hey, you need to start your business, kind of came to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about kind of making the next jump in your career, which is, working for, a high-tech firm or a larger company? And it's always something that I thought about in passing, but never really spent too much time on. And when they said that to me, it gave me a little bit of validation, said, maybe I need to look in this or think this through a little bit more. And so I kind of put that search out there and put some feelers out there. And what was interesting is one of the largest technology companies in the world, reached out to me and recruited me and said, hey, we would love to have you join our organization within the consulting services org and really help us kind of go down this new path that we've never been down before from a consulting perspective. And And really that's going to, your responsibility is going to help us figure out what is our services strategy, what are the service offerings that we need to develop to support our strategy as a company as a whole. And also really kind of be a champion within the organization globally to help our sales, our delivery teams really understand what this new technology and this new paradigm shift that the company as a whole is going down. And so so I thought that was, it was almost like a too good to be true type of scenario, but I made the leap forward and kind of ran with it. And
was it very, very surprising how different it is? Your experience had been working with, that mid-sized company. Was it very different jumping into, a giant company, even though it wasn't a consulting, it's a consulting firm, which is a little bit more nimble, or your role was more consulting, where the culture is very different?
Yeah, obviously you're going from, a speck on the chart to, someone who has 100,000 employees across the globe. I honestly didn't feel like it was that difficult. I think the mindset that I went into it with was saying, hey, I'm part of this large organization, but I have to look at it from my group and the other groups that I directly interact with, which significantly reduced that down to a much more, manageable aspect that I could internalize in my own head, right? So that 100,000 was down to, 2,000, 3,000, right? And for me, that's kind of how I approached it. And then as I got more comfortable with it and you kind of get more involved in the organization, you start to scale it out from there. And by that point, I kind of knew how the inner workings were. And I knew that, hey, my success is going to be also dependent on how I build relationships in the company. So it was a different aspect of how you go about being successful in a big company, not just your technical skills, but building those relationships.
True.
So that's kind of how I approached it.
So what propelled you to make your next move? So now you've had your own business now and worked in a ginormous company. What prompted this next move?
Sure. So part of it was for personal reasons. Others was just kind of where I was seeing my, current role go towards. And where it was shifting to was, something that I didn't really necessarily see myself in that role for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I think for me, it's important to really kind of be invigorated in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And for me, that's kind of being very involved deeply in the technology and hands on the keyboard and that kind of stuff. And the role that I was in was kind of shifting away from that, which is fine. But, I was more like, hey, let me just see what the market is out there. Let me understand what the opportunities are. And so I kind of jumped into it and kind of, where I decided, hey, I'm going to go into the next chapter of my career.
And so what made you, you really could have gone in a number of different directions. You could have gone back to work for yourself. You could have chosen another huge company. What made you decide to go in the direction you did and join the company you're with now?
Sure. So, I wasn't going to go back and work for myself. But I think for me, what it was I like the aspects of having a large company, right? There's a lot of benefits to having a large corporate entity behind what you're doing, obviously for financial purposes and, just all those things that come with it. But really, the company I'm at now was a startup, right, for 7 years that was acquired by another large company. But we still kind of operate as a startup within that larger company, right? So it's only 250, 300 people. And so for me, I was looking to get back into something a little bit smaller, but still have that big company backing and feel to it. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously a very short job search process. What were sort of the deliberate steps you took from the time you were ready to exploring your options to landing the job?
Sure. So the first thing that I did is I kind of had to pull up my resume, and it was definitely one of the things that I neglected to upkeep over the years. And I went through and I said, okay, I have, 4 years to update here. And what I found really difficult was to actually frame up my career and revise what I already had in kind of a storytelling way, and also kind of be able to properly lay out my accomplishments, right? So I wasted a whole bunch of time just sitting in front of the computer and writing a whole bunch of different ways of, hey, this is my story. This is how it flows from, one position to the next position, and trying to map it in a certain way that told that story. And I found it extremely difficult to do that. So one of the first things that I had to do is I need to have someone, I need to tell my story to that person. That person needs to provide an objective viewpoint on what I'm telling them, and then be able to kind of put that on paper so that when I walk through my story, in front of an interviewer, that it tells not just what my responsibilities were, but really what my outcomes were from that role, and do it in a cohesive and constructive way.
Right. And we worked together. We wrote your LinkedIn summary. We wrote your resume. What was the next step from there?
Yeah. So after I worked with you, and, by the way, it was definitely one of the better decisions I made, was just to work with someone like yourself and to really help formalize what that story is.
It was a good story, so thank you.
Yeah. And so once I got the resume down and the LinkedIn profile down and all that was set, I think my job search was a little bit different than maybe some other people might take, right? I had first of all, I relied on my personal connections first and foremost, but I also created kind of my primary list of companies, right? So there's like 2 or 3 companies that were kind of my first choices. And then there was kind of like their related companies, right? So that second band, if you will, was companies that had very similar aspects to the first grouping that I really wanted to go towards. And so I was very targeted in not only the companies I was looking to join or apply to, but also very methodical, right? So I didn't do a spray and pray with my resume. I first wanted to leverage my connections, and then I wanted to stay within the confines of the companies that I felt that I could be successful at, that I felt that I wanted to work at. So I did a lot of kind of background into certain companies, really understood how they've done historically from a performance perspective, where are they going in the future, is there growth opportunities, that sorts of thing, and kept it very small. I kept it very deliberate.
How big was your first tier list, and how large was your second one?
So there, in total, there's about 7 companies, 3 in the first group, 4 in the second group.
How did you do the homework? Was it strictly online? Was it talking to people to sort of, to your point, see what was going on in those organizations and see if you felt like you could make a difference there?
Yeah. So first, for the companies I was looking at, and I had relationships with people who currently work there, I definitely reached out to them, right? You're going to get that other side of the picture for companies than what you see kind of from their digital footprint.
That's right. Yeah.
Or what they're putting online. So that was hugely important. So I definitely wanted to take advantage of that. And then I kind of dovetail that into, looking at their online presence, looking at what kind of jobs they're posting out, what are some of their hiring trends, if they're a publicly traded company, what is their financial performance, all that sorts of stuff. For the companies that didn't have any existing relationships, that it was doing the due diligence of looking at the information that I had available to me.
Okay. What would you say was your biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge as far as?
In terms of in the job search, whether it was really being able to peel back the layers and get inside picture, or was it trying to make connections with companies where you didn't have a personal relationship? Was there an obstacle that you didn't expect during your process, during your job search?
So it wasn't so much about looking into a company as it was more about my own skills, which is important, especially in technology. I think for me, being at the previous company for 4 years, get a sense of, I don't want to say comfortable, but you focus on that product set or on that technology area so much that sometimes you forget to look up and look around and see what the other parts of the industry is going. And one of the things I realized is that, luckily for me, the skills that I had and I've been focusing on kind of ran in parallel with where the rest of the companies were looking for and where the industry was going. I just didn't have certain skill sets directly related to those products, but they were very much transferable. So I feel I was lucky in that aspect. But for me, I realized like, oh, wow, okay. So I definitely, the technology that I thought 2-3 years ago which was the hottest thing on the planet, is not the hottest thing on the planet anymore. And I need to definitely up my skills and revamp those skills so that I can become attracted to what all these other companies are looking for. So that was the big one for me. Number two is some of the companies that I was looking at and, went deep into interviews with, realized that, they were definitely behind the 8 ball on kind of getting ramped up on some of these technologies, which surprised me, right? So you'd think like, hey, some of these large consulting companies or technology companies, how could they be, a year and a half, 2 years late to the game? And so for me, I kind of had to take a step back and look and say, hey, do I want to be a part of kind of building their practice or their capabilities up, or, do I want to come into something that's more mature and more running? So it was more about, hey, number one, the skills that I had, I needed to definitely freshen those up. And number two, kind of realizing that even some of these companies that have large presence in enterprises and so forth weren't necessarily up to, or weren't necessarily, I would say, ready and enabled to tackle some of these newer technologies as you might think they were.
And that speaks to you doing an earlier assessment of where you could help or where you wanted to help, because I'm sure you could have gone in and fought for investment in these new things, but did you want to engage in those sorts of battles? Yes, no, all of that.
I wasn't looking to.
You weren't right. That was not a fit for you. Okay. How did your job search look like on a daily, weekly basis? Because you had other stuff to do.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't something I did daily. It was like a biweekly thing, right? I had my 7 or so companies, and for me, on a weekly basis, if I had made contact with someone or a representative of that company in 1 week, I would make sure that the next week I wanted to follow up with them. So for me, it was just making sure that I was always kind of top of their inbox or voicemail, if you will. Even if there was no movement, I made sure that I was showing that I was still interested, right? And then making sure that I was fresh in their mind. At the same time, I want to make sure, hey, am I still a candidate or am I just being strung along here? So that was important. And, recruiters get very busy, and especially in tech, the job market is extremely hot right now. So they're just getting inundated with candidates for a number of different jobs. So, it was more like a weekly/bi-weekly type of thing. It definitely wasn't a daily thing, but it's just a matter of just, staying on top of it, not being overly aggressive, but just kind of staying abreast to where I was in the overall process of certain companies.
Did you find that recruiters were responsive to those emails or voicemails, or does it not matter? The point was to be able to leave it, whether they responded or not, but at least
they were responsive.
They were.
Yeah, they were definitely yes.
Did you have relationships with those recruiters prior, or did you forge those during this process?
No, so I had relationships with recruiters at the companies I applied, but they were either in a different role or no longer with the company. Right. So, I had to forge, new relationships. But, I think for having an existing employee, so someone who had similar skill sets as I did, who was currently working that company and who had worked with me, that's really where the relationship mattered, right? And so if an employee was referring me, it doesn't matter what relationship I had with the recruiter, that person could vouch for me to the recruiter, and it made that process so much easier.
That is wonderful advice. Is there any advice that you would give to someone looking to make a jump into what you're doing now?
In tech, it's no question. I think, so there's two different things. One, if it's someone who's already in tech today, I would say make sure you stay up on your skills, right? Don't let your skills slide, no matter how comfortable you feel in your job, or, maybe today you might think, hey, I'm going to stay here for the next 20, 30 years. I think in tech, my personal opinion is I think those days of working at the same company for 15, 20, 30 years in tech is almost not existing anymore.
Yeah.
And so always take a couple months out of every year to brush up in your skills, whether it's getting a certification, if you're a developer, learn a new coding language, see how that applies to kind of the way that technology is shifting. If you are in another industry and looking to get into tech, I think number one is you need to think long and hard about, hey, am I comfortable with constant change? Am I comfortable with that? Hey, I might not work at the same company for 10, 15, 20 years. And if you go into something like consulting, am I comfortable with traveling, 50, 75, 80% of the time? So those are some things I think if you have to knock out right away, especially if you're coming from another industry. If you're someone that says, hey, I love technology and I love constant change and I don't mind traveling, then, hey, I think you should go for that person.
That's a really good point.
Definitely stay on top of your skills.
Isn't it getting so much harder to do that? I mean, my sense, I'm sure technology always was changing, but it does seem like it's just ramping up.
Yeah, it is. No question. And especially in my space in cloud, right?
Yeah.
I kind of chose to focus on Amazon Web Services, but I need to have deep understanding of things like Microsoft Azure and Google Compute Cloud, Compute Platform, and then all the kind of the supporting tools and the open source tools that go along with it, and all the other tooling that the enterprises use on top of, especially you get things like financial services, kind of the security metrics and the security rules. At times, it's very daunting. So
that's a really good point. So it's keeping your skills up, but you can't just be a surface level. You really needs to be, a little deeper.
I mean, yeah. So one of the things that I said, it was like 6 months ago, I said to myself, right, I'm never going to go all in on one certain technology ever again, because the technology changes every 2-3 years. Sure, there's going to be different iterations and you can apply your previous knowledge to those newer technologies, but there's so much competition out. There's so much choice. And that's one of the great things of technology is that it provides multiple choice for any company to successfully accomplish what they're trying to accomplish with technology. Yeah. And sometimes people who kind of go all in on one certain thing might find themselves in 3, 4, 5 years on the outside looking in, find that the need for them to ramp up their skills and learn some of the newer things is much more challenging than if they kept some sort of iterative process throughout the years as it relates to understanding those newer technologies.
In addition to sort of making it harder for you to keep your skills up, pigeonholing yourself also can position you on paper, or at least when I'm writing a resume, as someone who really is just a one-trick pony. They're not able to come to something else. Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the challenges that I ran into, before I reached out to you, was saying, hey, I've done all these different things in my career across all different types of technologies, and I don't really know how to tell that story. It's very difficult.
I agree. So this is one of my favorite questions to ask. What is something that you think might surprise people about you?
Quite tall. I'm 6'5" and pretty athletic for someone 6'5". Yeah, so I'm an active athlete. I play a lot of tennis, golf, basketball league. So yeah,
I hope
I'm pretty tall.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes I surprise myself that, I travel as much as I do and able to get on airplanes and not have too much difficulty doing that. But I've learned the ropes of airlines and where to sit. And, luckily, the more you travel, you get more perks and upgrades, which makes it a little bit easier. Yeah, I think for me, I'm
a little bit more leg room.
Yeah.
Well, so what would you say, what's next for you? Where do you see yourself in the next little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I just being successful in my current role, doing the best that I can, and making sure that I'm filled, personally in what I'm doing and happy what I'm doing, and being able to do it with great success. So, I have no other plans other than doing really well in my current role right now.
Excellent. Well, congratulations again, and thank you for joining us. You spelled out really an ideal job search, and to me, my biggest takeaway is relationships and follow-up. And when you landed in a couple of months, I didn't hear you once say, I applied online, any of those sorts of efforts that really just don't give you as big a return on your investment. So thank you for sharing that. I'm really excited for people to hear this.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation, and definitely thank you for, all your help and support this process. You've been great. So, anyone listening, I couldn't recommend enough, not just, yourself, but, even if you're struggling to figure out your resume or tell your story, I think everyone needs to consider hiring someone who gives an objective view and is able to lay that story out. Because again, it's not about your responsibilities that you've done in your role. To be blunt, no one cares about that, because everyone knows in any job, your responsibilities shift from a day-to-day basis. And it's really about the outcomes and what you've done and what are the actual quantifiable metrics that you can portray in your job search. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
You've been listening to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's skim online readers, hiring and decision makers, go to www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.